At 4:15 a.m. on June 12, 2026, an F-15 Strike Eagle was flying at full speed through the valleys of the Zagros Mountains with a GBU-28 bunker busting, bomb under the fuselage, and orders to wipe off the Mapan Iranian command post buried meters underground. But in the next 90 seconds, Iran's air defenses would do something the Pentagon hadn't seen in more than 30 years. Shoot down a U.S. aircraft in enemy airspace, and what followed was the most dangerous and audacious combat rescue operation in modern military history. The flight of 2 Strike Eagles crosses into Iranian airspace at low altitude, with the peaks of the Zagros rising on both sides, invisible to the Bavar 373 long-range missile network. Radar waves pass overhead like a flashlight sweeping a room while you're hiding under the floor. But there's something most don't understand about bunker-busting bombs. They cannot be launched from a valley. The GBU-28 weighs more than 2 tons and needs to fall from a height high enough for gravity to do the dirty work. Drill meters of reinforced concrete before detonating. Throwing it at a low altitude would be like trying to stick a knife into a table by dropping it from chest height. It just doesn't have the strength, it doesn't work. The plane has to climb up and expose itself to every radar antenna for a mile around. For the crew of the Strike Eagle leader, a pilot and a weapons systems officer, the WSO, the mission boils down to a brutal equation. Stay hidden and abort or ascend and become the brightest target in Isfahan province. The pilot pulls the lever. The Strike Eagle breaks the radar horizon. Isfahan opens underneath. Nuclear facilities, missile bases, anti-aircraft batteries on high alert. This is not an empty desert. It is one of the most defended airspaces on the planet. The WSO weapons system officer activates the pod targeting sniper. The infrared screen stabilizes over the complex target 30 kilometers away. The thermal signature matches the reconnaissance images of the night before. The coordinates fit to the millimeter. The WSO confirms the target. They are seconds away from dropping the bomb and finishing the mission cleanly. Unfortunately, time had just run out. In a gorge below, a Russian Tor M1 had been camouflaged for hours among the rocks with its radars in passive mode so as not to give away its position, waiting for exactly this moment. That a US plane made the mistake of poking its head over the ridges. And here comes what makes the Tor M1 so lethal in this scenario. It's not a long-range system designed to shoot down bombers 200 kilometers away. It's an ambush system. Think of him as a spider in his web. It does not chase its prey. It stands still with the sensors off, invisible to the plane's radar warning receivers, and when the dam passes overhead, it activates everything at once. Fixation, firing, and guiding in less than 5 seconds. 2 missiles come off the rails at Mach 2.8, closing the distance faster than any pilot can react. The WSO's radar alert receiver screams with a tone that no airman ever wants to hear, a continuous tone that means that something is already coming your way and that the time to think is over. The pilot releases flares and pulls the lever with everything. 7Gs instantly pushing blood down. The first missile bites the decoy and gets lost, chasing a flare into the empty sky. But the second one did not. The explosion feels like someone ripping the floor out from under you. The plane shakes so violently that the eye holes crash into the cockpit as the dashboard lights flicker, die and turn red for emergency. The smell of burning hydraulic fluid fills the aircraft before the crew can even process what just happened. And when the pilot tries to move the lever, the controls simply don't respond. $90 million turned into a 20-ton coffin falling uncontrollably on the province of Isfahan. The pilot searches for the ejection handle amid the smoke and chaos. The weapons systems officer searches for his, and in a split second, 2 Martin Baker seats pierce the cockpit and shoot into Iranian skies. 2 parachutes open over the mountains. However, the wind catches them differently. The pilot drifts east, and the WSO drifts west. By the time they touch the rocky ground of the Zagros, they are separated by more than 2 kilometers of mountainous terrain, and the entire Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps already knows that they are there. But in the world of military aviation, there is a code that overrides any other target, any other priority, and any other order. No one is left behind. And that code has a name. It's called the Sandy Protocol, and a rescue plan is activated at the exact moment an American aviator touches enemy soil. But a combat rescue is not simply sending a helicopter to pick someone up. A CSAR or combat search and rescue is one of the most complex and deadliest missions in any country's military repertoire. You're flying slow, noisy helicopters to the exact same spot where enemy air defenses just proved they can shoot down planes, and you're doing so as hostile. Ground forces converge on your fallen pilots like wolves closing in on a wounded prey. With each passing minute, Iran's perimeter narrows and the chances of getting them out alive are shrinking. And in this case, the problem was twofold. Because there was not an airman on the ground, there were 2 miles apart from the mountains in one of Iran's most militarized provinces, and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps had already launched the largest manhunt of the war to find them first. June a.m. on June 12th, just 4 hours after the shootdown, the A-10 Thunderbolts operating near the border are ordered to divert into Iranian territory as a rescue escort. The Air Force just sent the ugliest, slowest, and most brutally effective aircraft in its arsenal to do exactly the job it was designed to do. Fly low, fly slow, and destroy anything that stands between a rescue team and a downed pilot. Down in the valleys of the Zagros, a convoy of Iranian rapid reaction forces was advancing directly towards the position of the fallen pilot. The siege was closing quickly. If the convoy caught up with him, the pilot would go from being a rescued man to being a prisoner of the Revolutionary Guards and, what is worse, an international bargaining chip. The leading A-10 descends. The pilot holds the trigger for exactly 2 seconds, and at that precise moment, the convoy ceases to exist. They have been pulverized by depleted uranium bullets, but that aggressive maneuver had just cost the A-10 something it can't recover: altitude and speed. The cannons roar, bouncing off the canyon walls, and tracers lighting up the valley had just turned the Warthog into a flying neon sign that says, "I'm here. Shoot me," and someone accepted the invitation. In the previous weeks, Iran had flooded the battlefield with thousands of Chinese shoulder missiles. Misag-2, reverse-engineered copies of Russian man-pads. An Iranian soldier who had been in position for hours, who had let the blast pass because they were flying too high and too fast for his weapon, had just received exactly the target his training promised. Something slow, something low, and something that just burned all of its energy in one attack. He aims, waits for the fixation tone on his earpiece, and shoots. The Misag-2 uses a more modern infrared seeker than the old Soviet SA-7, with a cooled sensor that allows it to compare thermal signatures and distinguish between a falling flare and a moving engine. The pilot releases flares, but at this altitude and at this speed, it's like throwing a distraction at a dog that already has its jaw closed on your leg. Too late, too close. The missile hits the right engine directly and shatters it in a hail of metal fragments that pierce the fuselage like shrapnel. Any other aircraft would be dead, but the A-10 carries 5,000 kilogram titanium armor wrapping around the cockpit, specifically designed for the pilot to survive, exactly for these types of scenarios. The left engine struggles to keep the aircraft in the air while the pilot points what is left of the Warthog towards a plateau, and when the altitude is no longer enough, it ejects. The A-10 ends up crashing into the waters of the Persian Gulf, near the Strait of Hormuz. Now, there is no longer just one American airman on Iranian soil, there are 3. But while 3 American airmen were trying to stay safe and isolated in enemy territory, another completely different machinery was already in motion. Because to rescue a pilot, someone has to land, put boots on the ground, and load the fallen aviator into a helicopter in the middle of hostile territory. And this work is not done by fighters or A-10s or drones. It is done by a specialized unit that American pilots know as the last resort between freedom and an Iranian cell. The Combat Rescue Package